I spent the whole night stitching my daughter's wedding dress, threading each needle stroke with aching fingers, never once stopping to rest my tired eyes. Every stitch carried a memory. Every thread held a promise. The steady tick-tock of the clock followed me until morning, counting the hours like the quiet unraveling of my own life. When I finally finished, the first soft ray of sunrise slid through the window and rested on the white fabric. It was beautiful. It didn't have the shine of a designer boutique gown or the price of a high-end fashion house, but it was made with the kind of love only a mother can give, a love that keeps believing, even after a lifetime of sacrifice. I carried the dress in trembling hands, wrapped in an old sheet so it wouldn't be stained. When I reached my daughter Zuri's home, she was surrounded by her friends, laughing and sipping coffee from delicate cups. She looked like one of those distant, polished socialites. For a moment, pride warmed my chest, then everything changed. Zuri looked up, scanned me from head to toe, and asked coldly, "Is that the dress?" I nodded with a smile. I unwrapped the fabric slowly, revealing it like a treasure. She glanced at it for barely a moment before curling her lip. "This looks like something a poor woman would wear." Her friends snickered quietly. Before I could speak, she grabbed the dress and tossed it into the trash. "I'm not getting married looking like a seamstress, Mom." My breath vanished. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply gathered my shattered pride and walked out before they noticed the tears spilling down my face. I walked home with blurred vision. The sun blazed above me, yet all I felt was cold. The dress haunted my thoughts, every stitch burning like an open wound. I remembered the sleepless nights, the years spent at the machine my own mother left me, the calluses on my fingers, everything I sacrificed so Zuri could rise higher than I ever did. And I wondered when love became something to be ashamed of. When I arrived home, I sat before my sewing machine and stared at it. The familiar humming that once comforted me now sounded like mourning. I touched the pedal, searching for steadiness, and felt a strange stillness rise inside me. Not sadness, something colder. A controlled quiet that appears only when a heart breaks but refuses to collapse. Days passed. Zuri never called, not even to apologize. I heard through others that her designer dress had arrived from Paris, perfect, flawless, expensive. But perfection has no heart, and that gown, no matter how grand, could never carry her story. One afternoon, I went back to her house. I waited until she left and slipped inside quietly. The scent of luxury perfume filled the air, but in the corner of her room stood the trash bin. And inside it, buried under scraps and paper, lay my dress. Wrinkled, stained, rejected, but still whole. Just like me. I lifted it gently, held it against my chest, and took it home. I spread it across my work table, watching the fabric glow beneath the sunset. It was beautiful, even in its hurt, like a mother who still loves despite being wounded. I ran my fingers over the seams and felt all my love still beating there. And I knew then, this dress would not die in a garbage can. For the next several nights, I shut myself inside my sewing room. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I just sewn. I added crystal flowers along the hemline. I stitched in vintage lace. And within every new layer, I placed more than decorations. I hid pieces of my life. One stitch for every tear. One thread for every sacrifice. One flower for every day I felt unseen. As the dress transformed, so did I. I was no longer the mother who bowed her head under her daughter's scorn. I became a woman who finally understood that love doesn't mean tolerating everything, it means choosing what deserves to stay. When I finished, the mirror showed me someone new. My eyes no longer held sadness, only resolve. The gown gleamed beneath the lamp, and its radiance held more than beauty. It held justice. The wedding day arrived. I hadn't planned on going, but something, dignity, perhaps, pushed me forward. I put on a simple cream dress, pinned up my hair, and walked with steady steps. every stride felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. When I reached the Grand Magnolia Ballroom in Charlotte, the room sparkled with music, lights, flowers, and laughter. Zuri stood there in her extravagant foreign lace gown. She looked lovely, yes, but hollow. She didn't notice me slip inside, and I didn't want her to. I stayed near the entrance, watching quietly. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of what was about to unfold. Because that night, my daughter wouldn't just have a wedding, she would receive a lesson. When the clock hit 10, I stepped toward the center of the room. Conversations stopped. All eyes turned to me. Zuri looked up. Her smile faded instantly. And I realized that life had been sharpening me for this moment all along. Because sometimes, a mother's love isn't shown with tears, but through a dress that shines brighter than shame. Needles have always been my closest companions. Since I was 12 and my mother taught me to sew a button, I knew this would be my language to the world. I was never fluent with words, but my hands learned to speak. And through decades of threads, fabrics, and silence, I discovered that every seam could carry a memory, even a life. When I became a widow, Zuri was only 6. My husband, Kofi, died in a construction accident, and overnight I was left alone with a child and a sewing machine. I cried that first night. But the next morning, I wiped my tears, turned on the machine, and began to sew. After that, every garment I created carried a promise: I will never let my daughter go hungry. We lived in a tiny room behind the tailoring shop where I worked. Zuri slept on a small cot surrounded by fabric scraps she turned into makeshift dolls. I watched her and believed that one day all this effort would make sense. That one day she would understand how love can be stitched into life. For years, my fingers bled over other people's bridal gowns, silk, satin, imported lace, the dreams of women who could afford what I never could. And while sewing their veils, I often imagined the day I would create a wedding dress for my own daughter. Not the most expensive one, not the fanciest, but one made from the only thing I had in abundance: love. When Zuri turned 15, I bought her first brand new dress. Not second-hand. Not patched. New. It was sky blue with a white ribbon I embroidered across the chest. That night, watching her dance, I felt every sacrifice melt away. She hugged me tight and whispered, "You are the best mom in the world." That phrase stayed with me. I didn't know that years later those same words would return as a hollow echo, like a promise that never survived time. Zuri grew older, and little by little, she drifted away from the world that had shaped us both. She went to college in the city, paid for by a small business loan I secured after selling my old car. She studied hard, climbed higher, met new people, and built a new life. But when she came back, she wasn't the same girl I had raised with love and scraped pennies. Her voice had changed. Her posture too. She no longer called me mama, but mother. And every time I spoke, I caught that familiar flicker in her eyes, annoyance mixed with shame. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But the truth revealed itself slowly. The calls left unanswered. The visits that grew shorter. And then the sentence that tore through me like a sharpened needle: "I wish you had been able to get an education." She didn't realize it, but she was telling me that the love I poured into her childhood wasn't enough. That my hands, the very hands that stitched her dreams into fabric, no longer held value in the world she now wanted to belong to. Even so, when she told me she was getting married, something innocent inside me bloomed. Finally, I could give her the gift I had dreamt of all her life. Her wedding dress. I offered to make it myself. She hesitated, then agreed. I took it as a sign. A bridge. A small chance to stitch together what time had torn. That night, before I touched the machine, I whispered, "Lord, guide my hands. Let every stitch be a blessing." I spent days choosing fabrics I could afford. Ivory lace. Soft layers of tulle. Tiny pearls a client once offered as payment. Every thread carried a hope. Every fold held a quiet tear. And inside the lining, hidden where no one would ever see it, I sewed a tiny piece of my own wedding dress. My silent message to her. Take me with you, daughter. Even if you no longer see me, I'll be there. But when she rejected it, she didn't just throw a dress into the trash. She hurled away my story, my love, the invisible thread that tied us together. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat staring at my silent sewing machine and thought of my mother, how she sewed until exhaustion blurred her vision. She used to tell me, "Daughter, women like us don't wield swords or fortune. Our strength is in our hands." And suddenly, I understood. My strength wasn't in being accepted. It was in continuing to weave my own destiny, even when others unraveled it again and again. I touched the stained, wrinkled fabric I had pulled from the trash. I ran my fingers across the seams she had rejected and felt my love still alive inside it. I remembered all the times I hugged her without being hugged back. The moments she avoided me. The "Mom, please don't come dressed like that" comments that sliced deeper than knives. And I realized something powerful. Humiliation, when met with patience, can become wisdom. Pain, when endured long enough, can become transformation. And that transformation had already begun. Over the next days, something inside me shifted. I began sewing again, but not for her. For myself. Every stitch was healing. Every thread, freedom. The machine hummed as if it understood my soul itself. I wasn't creating a gown anymore. I was stitching back my dignity. And though Zoe had no idea, I already had a plan. On her wedding day, she would wear the dress she chose. But everyone would remember the one she abandoned. Because some loves fade. And others are avenged with grace. And mine was ready to shine. The wedding morning dawned beneath a heavy gray sky. It wasn't raining, but the air felt like a storm. As if the world sensed something was about to break. I dressed in the only good outfit I owned, the same one I wore to my mother's funeral. I pinned my hair neatly, not to impress anyone, but because that day, I was going to face my past standing tall. I placed the restored gown inside a white linen bag, folded with the care of someone guarding a sacred truth. It wasn't a gift, nor a complaint. It was an answer. A quiet answer to a daughter who had forgotten what unconditional love looks like. Walking to the bus stop, the wind pushed hard against me. I held the bag tight. As if it were my own heart. During the long ride, memories played in my mind. Zuri laughing as a little girl. Hugging me without shame. Speaking to me with a love that once felt eternal. Now, those same memories hurt more than needles. The wedding ballroom was enormous, gilded columns, a ceiling that reached the heavens, sparkling glasses, exotic flowers, glowing lights. Everything perfect. Perfect and empty. I paused at the door, watching people laugh and pose for photos. Zuri stood in the center, luminous in her designer gown. Beautiful, yes, but hollow. When she saw me, her smile froze. I walked toward her, but before I could reach her, a woman, the groom's mother, stepped in front of me with a strained, polite smile. "You must be Zuri's mother?" I nodded. "Lovely to meet you," she said, though her eyes disagreed. "Could you wait, somewhere back there? We're preparing for the family photos." She scanned me from head to toe with the cold judgment I've endured all my life. And I obeyed. I stood near the back, beside the heavy curtains. A ghost at my own daughter's celebration. During the ceremony, no one approached me. No one asked who I was. Zuri didn't introduce me. To her, I wasn't her mother that day. I was an inconvenience. A shadow she preferred hidden. The music began. The couple danced. People cheered. I clapped too, but my hands trembled, not with joy, but with restrained fury. I watched my daughter glowing with confidence and pride. As if she had risen on her own. And for a moment, I wondered if she had forgotten who carried her through hunger. Who stitched her childhood? Who traded her own dreams for Zuri's future? But she hadn't forgotten. She had simply buried it. Because sometimes the truth hurts so much, you choose to erase it instead of honor it. I stayed longer, not to watch her, but to understand. At what moment had my daughter stopped being mine? A bridesmaid approached awkwardly. "Can I bring you anything, ma'am?" "Just observing," I replied. "Observing what?" "How a mother becomes invisible." She lowered her eyes, speechless. I smiled gently, no anger, just an old, tired sadness that no longer needed blame. At midnight, when the music grew loud and people danced without care, I rose from my seat. I walked toward the center of the ballroom, the gown in my hands. One by one, the guests turned. Whispers died. Silence spread. Zoe turned around, her face draining of color. "Mom, what are you doing?" she whispered, panic tightening her voice. "Please, sit down." I held the white bag in my hands and stepped forward. "I only came to return something that belongs to me," I said. A wave of murmurs swept through the ballroom. Some people laughed, others froze. I ignored them all as I slowly opened the bag and lifted the dress, the same dress she had called a poor woman's gown. But it wasn't the same anymore. It shone. The lights of the ballroom danced on the tiny stones I had stitched one by one. The lace I had restored glowed as if it had been woven by angels. It was no longer just a dress. It was a masterpiece. Silence spread like fire. Zuri stepped back, tears filling her eyes, and for the first time in many years, those tears were not because of me. What is this?" she whispered. "Your dress, daughter. The same one you threw away." "I transformed it. Just like I transformed myself." She stared at it, trembling. "But, it's beautiful." "Yes," I answered softly. "Beautiful things don't come from money. They come from sacrifice. From nights without sleep. From years of choosing love even when it hurts. Every thread carries my story. Every stitch carries my name." The room held its breath. Zuri covered her face. "Mom, please stop." "No," I said gently. "Stop is what I told myself every time I saw the shame in your eyes. Today I'm not here to complain. I'm here to remind you where you come from." A single pair of hands began to applaud. Then another. And another. Soon, the entire ballroom was clapping, bridesmaids, guests, even the groom's mother. Zuri collapsed to her knees crying. I walked to her, placed my hands on her face, and whispered. "There is no shame in being humble, daughter. The only shame is forgetting the hands that taught you how to fly." She tried to hug me. But I stepped back. "Not yet," I said quietly. "Not until you understand what love truly means." I turned around and walked out through the applause, gown in hand. Each step was a goodbye. Each breath felt like a wound finally stitching closed. Outside, the night air felt new. Mine again. The moon hung above like an old lantern, and the lace of the gown glowed with a ghostly light. There was no music now. No crowd. Only the silence of a woman who had finally spoken without raising her voice. When I got home, I hung the gown in front of the mirror. It looked too beautiful to ever have been thrown away. But there was something my daughter didn't know. Days before the wedding, when I salvaged the dress from the trash, I didn't just repair it. I gave it a soul. Inside the lining, tucked between layers of tulle, I had sewn tiny handwritten notes. Pieces of my heart. One read. "When you were born, I thought life was returning what it had taken from me." Another. "I stitched your first dress with old fabric, but with hands full of hope." And the smallest of all, my mother's words. "The thread between a mother and daughter never breaks. It only stretches until one of them learns to let go." I didn't know if Zuri would ever find them. But I stitched them anyway. Sometimes you sew words because speaking them is too painful. 3 days later, she knocked on my door. She looked broken, trembling, holding the gown in her hands. I opened it, she whispered. I found your letters. She sat down, her breathing shaky. For the first time in years, she looked like my little girl again. I didn't know, Mom, she cried. I didn't know everything you had done for me. You didn't have to know, I told her softly. Mothers don't count the stitches. We just sew. She broke down, sobbing. I was such a fool. No, I said. You were human. And pride is also inherited, just like your eyes. She knelt beside me the same way she used to when she was a child. She took my hands, both trembling, both searching. Forgive me, she whispered. You don't need forgiveness, I told her softly. You need to learn. We stayed like that in silence. I didn't cry, because when forgiveness is real, it doesn't hurt. It heals. She rested her head on my lap, and for a moment, I felt her childhood again, the warmth, the fragility, the small weight that once depended on me for everything. It was as if the years had quietly rewound. After a while, she looked up. Can I stay with you for a few days? Of course, I smiled. But you'll have to earn your keep, sewing, sweeping, cooking, living. That night, we shared dinner for the first time in years. But the silence was no longer painful. It was warm, necessary. Zuri ate slowly, stealing small glances at me, as if she were seeing me for the very first time. I always thought you were weak, she said suddenly. But now I realize you were just tired. Yes, daughter, I replied gently. Love can tire you, too. The next morning, while she slept, I took the gown and placed it inside a wooden box. Not as a trophy, never that. But as proof. Proof that broken things can be mended. That bonds can be resewn if someone has the courage to accept their scars. Before closing the box, I added one last note. When you read this, I may no longer be here. But remember, humility is not inherited. It is learned. And today, my daughter, you have taken your first stitch. I placed the box in the closet beside my threads, needles, and the last remnants of the blue fabric from her 15th birthday dress. Everything that had shaped my life now rested quietly in one corner. For the first time in many years, I felt peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of someone who stitched her soul back together and left the scar visible, not hidden. The days she stayed with me were unlike anything we'd lived before. We shared breakfasts, conversations, silences that no longer cut. I worked in my sewing studio while she sat by the window, watching. Sometimes she tried to sew with me, clumsy, laughing at herself, pricking her fingers as the thread slipped away. She looked like the little girl who once asked why Mama's dresses were always the prettiest, even if they didn't sparkle. But peace never lasts long when old wounds haven't fully healed. One afternoon, while we washed dishes, the phone rang. Zuri answered. Her expression changed instantly. It's Amani Ellington, she murmured, her husband's mother, the same woman who looked at me like a servant at the wedding. Zuri listened quietly, nodding, afraid. When she hung up, she whispered. She's coming to dinner tomorrow. She wants to talk to both of us. The mug in my hand slipped and shattered on the floor. With me? I asked. Yes, Mom. Then let her come, I said firmly. But let her come with the truth, not just polite words. I didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, but because of a feeling I couldn't name. Something about Amani had stirred something old, something I didn't want to remember. I spent the next day cleaning the tablecloth, polishing silverware, preparing a simple meal. Not to impress her, but because dignity is never inappropriate, even when others choose to forget theirs. At exactly 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Zuri opened it. Amani walked in wrapped in elegance and a perfume that tried too hard to hide the past. Good evening, she said, barely acknowledging me. Good evening, I replied calmly. Please, come in. We sat at the table. The first minutes were silent, too silent. Zuri pretended to be composed, but her fingers trembled around the napkin. Imani toyed with the silverware, avoiding my eyes. I waited. Truths, like loose threads, always find a way to unravel. Finally, she spoke. I suppose you don't remember me. No, ma'am, I answered. But my memory never forgets a voice that wounds, and yours at the wedding was sharp. Zuri swallowed hard. The woman sighed, eyes dropping. You're right. And that is exactly why I came. The clock ticked loudly. Nothing else moved. When I was young, she continued. My mother had a seamstress, a woman who sewed better than anyone, yet charged almost nothing. I was arrogant. Proud. I treated her terribly. Made her redo things for hours. Sometimes I didn't pay her at all. My heart began to pound. One day, she said, voice cracking. That woman disappeared from the shop. I later learned she had been recently widowed and had a little girl. My hands froze. My breath caught. What are you saying? I whispered. She looked at me, eyes shining with guilt. That woman was you. The world stopped. I remembered that tailor shop. Her young face. Her rings. Her sharp voice that once shredded my pride. Yes, she continued with a trembling breath. I recognized you the night of the wedding. I didn't speak because shame is heavier than gold. Zuri stared at me, horrified. You worked for her, Mom? I nodded. Yes, daughter. And from her cruelty, I learned never again to let anyone humiliate me. Imani bowed her head. I came to ask for your forgiveness, Afia. I have carried that guilt for decades. I thought money made me superior, but when I saw you holding that gown, dignified and glowing in front of everyone, I realized I have spent my whole life secretly admiring a strength I never had. Dignity, Zuri whispered through her tears. I inhaled slowly as I looked at the woman who had caused me so much pain. And for the first time, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a person who, just like my daughter, had lived trapped in her own pride. Forgiveness isn't something you ask for with words, Mrs. Ellington, I said quietly. It's something you prove through actions. I know, she murmured. That's why I'm here. And what do you want now? I want to help. Help with what? Help you open your own studio. Zuri lifted her head, shocked. My mother, a studio? Yes, Imani replied softly. With your gift, you can guide other women. I can provide the funds, not to clean my guilt, but to use for something good, instead of how I once used it to belittle. I stared at her without speaking. A part of me wanted to push her away, to scream that forgiveness isn't purchased with money. But another part, the matured part, the part that had learned to stitch itself back together, whispered that accepting help can also be an act of healing. Fine, I said at last. I'll accept. But on one condition. Anything, she said quickly. The studio will carry my mother's name. What was her name? Hope. Because that was the only thing I never let go of. Zuri stood and wrapped her arms around me. Mom. I can't believe it. Believe it, child. Life doesn't always give you revenge. Sometimes it simply comes full circle. And when it does, seamstresses end up teaching queens how to mend their souls. Imani nodded, tears rolling down her face. You're right, she said. Money fades. Dignity is passed down. And humility, I added, cannot be washed away with wealth. It's earned through choices. Dinner ended in a different kind of silence, the silence that settles when broken things finally find a place to rest. Before she left, Imani held my hand. Thank you for letting me step inside your life. Thank you for finding the courage to return, I replied. When the door closed, Zuri stared at me with admiration shimmering in her eyes. Mom. I never realized you were this strong. No, love. I'm not strong. I just learned that the tightest stitches are the ones you sew after your heart has been torn. That night, I barely slept. It wasn't guilt or excitement. It was instinct. Something in Imani Ellington's words didn't match, too eager, too regretful, too late. I woke before sunrise. The air smelled of wet soil, and the birds sounded distant, like they were perched in another world. I poured a cup of coffee and opened the box holding the dress. I touched the lace, the hidden notes I once stitched into the lining. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. Truths, daughter, aren't searched for. They are unstitched. That sentence stayed with me all day. A week later, Imani returned with documents and a smile that felt rehearsed. I have the studio contract, Aya, she announced. So quickly? I don't want to waste time. I've been thinking deeply about everything. Zuri watched us with a blend of hope and unease, the way children look at old wounds reopening. Let's sit, I said. Imani spread the papers, explaining loans, equipment, space, staff. I nodded, but something was off. Her voice carried more than regret. It carried fear. What's the hurry, Mrs. Ellington? I asked. Hurry? No, I just want things done properly. I'm not talking about the studio. I'm talking about you. I met her eyes. You're hiding something. Her face drained of color. Her hands shook on the table. Zuri frowned, confused. 30 years ago, she began, her voice unsteady, my mother didn't just have seamstresses. She had secrets. My chest tightened. I was young, careless, living a comfortable but empty life. And then I met a man. A cold shiver swept through me. I knew exactly who she meant. Without her saying it. His name was Kofi Bakery, she said. The coffee nearly slipped from my hand. My breath froze. That was the name of my husband, Zuri's father. What are you saying? I whispered. What I should have told you years ago, Imani cried. Your husband worked in my mother's shop before he married you. He was gentle, quiet, and I fell in love with him. Zuri jerked upright. What? I never confessed to him, Imani continued. I never approached him after he chose you. But the day he died, I was there. The air thickened. Zuri stared at me, terrified. What does she mean, Mom? I couldn't answer. My voice was gone. Imani continued through broken sobs. I went to the hospital because a friend told me what happened. I arrived late. I only saw them wheeling him away. He was holding an envelope, one with your name on it, Afia. My vision blurred. For years I believed Kofi left nothing behind, that his death was as abrupt as the silence he left us with. An envelope? I whispered. Imani nodded. She pulled out an old, carefully folded paper from her purse. I kept it. I didn't know if I should give it to you. I thought you would hate me. But after the wedding, I realized I couldn't carry this any longer. My hands trembled as I took it. The paper was yellow, softened by time. I opened it with care. Kofi's handwriting was still bold and steady, so familiar it struck my heart. Afia, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you what you deserved to hear. I was not the husband or father I should have been. But there is something you never knew. Before you, I made mistakes, one that has followed me to this day. If a woman named Imani Ellington ever comes to you, do not resent her. Tell her I forgive her, for she, too, was trapped by the same pride that ruined me. The letter slipped from my hands. Zoe picked it up and read it, her tears falling silently. I looked at Imani, her face wet, her hands trembling in her lap. Suddenly everything made sense. The shame, the effort to make amends, her urgency. It wasn't only guilt. It was a plea for redemption. My mother harmed many people, Afia, Imani said shakily. And I became just like her. Until the night I saw you in that ballroom, holding that gown. I realized I needed to ask forgiveness for sins I inherited. I rose slowly. I didn't feel fury, only a deep sorrow, because life sews the threads we once cut with hatred. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked softly. Because the time wasn't right, she said. Because forgiveness can only be asked when you have the courage to look the person you hurt in the eye. Zoe stood up, shaking. So, my father. No, I cut in gently. None of this is your burden. Your father was mine. His past is not yours. I held her close. It felt like we were finally closing a wound that had bled for decades. Mrs. Ellington, I said at last. If your intention was to ask for forgiveness, you've done it. As for the studio, we will open it, but not as a way to erase guilt. We will open it so women learn that the past isn't erased with riches or tears, but with purpose. She nodded and wiped her face. Thank you, Afia. And if you truly want to honor Kofi's memory, I said softly, remember this, wounds aren't hidden under silk. They are stitched with honesty. That night, after she left, Zuri stared out the window. Mom, everything you went through, was it because of love? Yes, child. But not just for your father. For you. Because I learned a mother's love doesn't need applause. She rested her head on my shoulder. And in that quiet moment, I realized justice doesn't always arrive with anger or revenge, sometimes it arrives with the peace of truth. The following week, when emotions finally began to settle, a letter arrived. It was from a city estate lawyer. My name was written in elegant old ink, Afia Bakery. My heart skipped. I hadn't seen my name next to his in years. Kofi had left me many times, first through silence, then through death, and now, from beyond the grave, he spoke again. The envelope felt heavier than it looked. Inside was a sealed letter and a small brown packet closed with wax. Zuri, seeing my pale face, whispered, Mom, are you all right? I don't know, I murmured. But it seems your father didn't leave empty-handed. We sat together. I held the letter between my fingers, breathed deeply, and opened it. Kofi's voice in those lines felt alive, like time hadn't touched it. Afia, if this letter reaches you, it's because something I couldn't resolve in life has finally found its path. I never learned how to ask for forgiveness with words, but you always understood the language of silence. That is why I trust you will know how to read what I leave behind. I didn't give you an easy life. But I hope this gives you something more valuable than wealth, the truth. Inside the brown envelope is information about an account I never told you about. It's not much, but it was earned honestly, with my own hands. It is for you and Zuri, so you never have to live depending on anyone's pity. But more importantly, there is a journal. I wrote everything I never said out loud, everything I learned watching you love, even when love wasn't returned. If you remember me, don't remember the failures. Remember the stitches life forced us to make together. I froze, staring at the words. It was the first time in so many years that Kofi's voice felt bare, without excuses. Zuri hugged me tightly. Mom, he loved you. Yes, I whispered. But he didn't know how. The brown envelope held a leather journal, worn at the corners. Inside were pages full of Kofi's uneven handwriting, written in different moments of his life. The first pages were about us, the day we met, my laughter in the studio, how my sewing made him feel safe. Then the tone darkened, filled with fear, guilt, frustration. I can't bear how the world looks down on her for being humble. She sews like she's holding the universe together with every stitch. And all I seem to do is ruin what she repairs. We kept reading until we reached the final entries. These seemed to be from his last days, when illness had overtaken him. If you ever feel alone, Afia, look for the red thread. It's in the drawer of our old house, the one where you kept your studio fabrics, Kofi had written. That thread was the first you used to sew Zuri's dress. I kept it. I never told you, but whenever I saw that thread, I remembered why everything was worth it. That thread, my love, is the last thing that still connects me to you. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I turned on the lamp and opened the old box where I kept pieces of antique fabric. And there it was, the red thread. The same one I used to mend Zuri's christening gown. The same one that stitched my wedding veil. I held it gently, and the tears came without permission. It felt like the heartbeat of a past life, as if every memory I ever lived was woven into that thin strand. Zuri woke up when she heard me crying. She found me sitting on the floor with the open box. "What's wrong, Mom?" I held out the thread. Her face softened instantly. "Dad." "Yes," I breathed. "He kept it all this time." Zuri wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time I realized something: love, even flawed love, leaves trails behind like crumbs in a dark forest. You only need courage to follow them. A few days later, Amani walked into the studio. I hadn't seen her since the truth about Kofi resurfaced. She carried flowers and a weary, heavy expression. "I came to help finalize the contract," she said. "That won't be necessary," I replied. "The studio will open, but with different intentions." "Different how?" "I won't build it out of pity or guilt. I'll build it from dignity." I told her about the letter Kofi left. About the red thread. About the journal. She cried quietly. "He wrote me a letter too," she confessed. "But I never had the strength to read it." "Then read it," I told her gently. "The dead don't rest until their truths are finally heard." The day our studio opened, the sun shone brightly. Women from the West End, humble, hopeful, came out of curiosity. Some brought scraps of cloth. Others came simply wanting to learn. Above the door, I hung the sign. "Hope Studio, every stitch holds a story." As I taught those women how to sew, memories of my mother flooded back. Memories of hunger, of endurance, of silence. And in the chorus of sewing machines, scissors, and soft laughter, something bloomed inside me. Pride. A pride that felt real. Zuri moved among the students with an apron tied around her waist, helping them thread needles. She looked at me and smiled. "See, Mom? Everything started because of a dress thrown in the trash." "No, child," I corrected. "It began much earlier, with a mother who kept sewing even when life tried to tear every last thread from her hands." That afternoon, before locking up, I framed the red thread. Under it, I wrote, "In the end, every wound closes, if you dare to hold the needle with love." As I hung it on the wall, I realized that thread didn't just join fabric. It joined stories, generations, pain, and forgiveness. It was the invisible connection between me, my mother, my husband, my daughter, and all the women who had stitched their futures with wounded hands but courageous hearts. That night, before bed, I opened Kofi's "We Teach How to Begin Again." As I showed her around, the little girl's gaze fell on the framed red thread. She approached it and whispered, "Can that thread make dresses too?" I smiled. "No, little one. That thread sews things you can't see." "Like what?" "Like broken hearts." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked exactly like Zuri did when she was young. Time, I thought, has a habit of returning what we once lost, just wearing a different face, to see if this time we know how to protect it. That evening, as I locked the studio, Zuri approached with an envelope. "Mom, this letter came for you." The sender was the Black Women's Entrepreneurial Coalition. Inside was a handwritten message in strong, graceful script. "Afia Bakery. We have witnessed your work at Hope Studio. Your story has inspired many women. We want to honor you for proving that dignity can be sewn, stitch by stitch. Attached was an invitation to an event in the city. Zuri hugged me, eyes shimmering. You earned this, Mom. I shook my head gently. No, daughter. We all earned this. On the day of the awards ceremony, I wore my best dress, a simple cream one that I had sewn with my own hands. Zoe insisted on coming with me. And when I walked onto the stage, it felt as if the knots of all my past pains slowly began to loosen. In front of me sat women of every age, young, old, mothers, daughters, each carrying stories of sacrifice, abandonment, and silent strength. I took a breath and spoke into the microphone. You owe me nothing, Amani. No, Afia, she whispered. You saved me from myself. And don't blame your mother for being tough, it was her way of not breaking. She passed away weeks later. In her will, she left a donation to Hope Studio, not a fortune, but enough to keep the doors open. On a small note, she had written, "Thank you for sewing with forgiveness what I tore apart with pride." I cried, not from sorrow, but from release. Today, as I write this, I can hear Nia laughing outside. She's learning to sew with Zuri, using that same red thread she found years ago. Her tiny fingers move slowly, and even though she pricks herself sometimes, she keeps smiling. That smile, that is my legacy. Life is like a piece of fabric. It stains. It tears. It stretches. But no matter what, there is always a thread strong enough to join it again. I was a seamstress, a wife, a mother, and now a teacher. I have sewn dresses, hearts, and destinies. And if I've learned anything, it is this. Love is not always spoken. Sometimes it is sewn quietly by someone who refuses to give up. I close my eyes and remember that night long ago, the night my daughter threw my dress in the trash and called me poor. If someone had told me it would be the beginning of our healing, I would never have believed them. But now I know, the deepest wounds open not to destroy us, but to let the light in. This will be my final story, the last stitch made by these trembling hands. And I'm not afraid, because I know Zoe and Nia will continue sewing with the same red thread, carrying forward a legacy of dignity, love, and hope. And when the world tries to judge them for giving too much or living too simply, I hope they remember my words. There is no stitch stronger than the one made by a woman who has cried. For a woman who has cried, knows how to hold the needle with love. I smile, close my eyes, and let the silence settle. The red thread rests warm in my lap, pulsing like a small heartbeat. And just before sleep takes me, I hear my mother's voice whisper softly. You can rest now, daughter. The last stitch is done. And now, before I finish, I have one question for you. Did this story touch your heart? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you enjoyed the story and want more, you can support the channel with a super thanks. Your support helps me continue bringing these life stories to you.